Episode 61. After pointless recap, we start out with someone saying the Metrics are attacking and they have to protect the base, and we see spaceships firing lasers at each other. I'm so detached from this because I don't know if any characters I know are part of it. I guess it's a Cosmo flashback? Whatever. This feels like it's not even part of Sonic at all. One of the Metrics is told to go after Sonic, and then we see Cosmo thinking about Shadow, and somehow Cream already knows that she's been thinking about Shadow. Well, to be fair, if she can understand what Cheese is saying, maybe she's psychic. And our time is wasted even more with a recap of Shadow's backstory again. We could have just skipped past this and assumed that Cosmo would have been told us off screen. And it's really grating to hear Cream's voice for that length of time. And Tails thinks there's no way Shadow could have lived through that battle. And Chris says he thought he was imagining it at first, but they all saw Shadow, and he wonders how he survived. So it's official. That issue of the comic where Flynn wrote that Sonic was showing Archie Shadow to all his friends and pretended he was the ex-Shadow, that's not canon to the anime at all. Shadow has amnesia and wonders how all those strangers knew his name. And the robot sidekicks tell him that he knew them on the Ark. Eggman says that Shadow should keep his amnesia in front of him, denies that he would do that in front of Shadow. Shadow somehow doesn't take off, and then Rouge lampoons how bad of a liar Eggman is. So far this plot's gone nowhere. Shadow has no reason to trust Eggman enough to stay with him. Though to be fair, he doesn't remember him, so how would he know Eggman's pure evil? He's not doing anything evil. Eggman puts his shield up against the Metric's laser attack. I have to wonder why he made his spaceship purple. I'd expect Rouge's spaceship to look that way. I think it is. It's so confusing having multiple ships. Shadow's sent after the Metrics with the incentive that he'd tell him his past if he did, so Shadow spin ashes all over the place. Again, how can he breathe in space? How is he not suffocating and freezing to death? More importantly, how the fuck is Shadow not destroying the spaceship with Chaos Control right away? Instead, I have to see a much more interesting to watch scene where Shadow spin ashes all over the spaceship, and Eggman amusingly hits his robots to demonstrate that hitting metal creates vibrations, which shakes up its insides, to explain how Shadow's damaging the spaceship. Shadow passes out from exhaustion, so at least they're balancing his power. And Eggman retrieves him and fires lasers, but the lasers get destroyed. So Eggman launches a bunch of missiles, totally ineffectively. Rouge flies away from Eggman in her spaceship, since she's always a dirty coward who runs away when she knows she's beat. But I'm still really disappointed that they abandoned this plot thread of her working for Eggman that easily. I hope she comes back to Bokoon to make him do good things some more. Rouge shows Tails footage of an explosion, and tells him that Eggman didn't stand a chance. I'm sure he survived. Cosmo says that Metrix had attacked her and her family and starts to cry. We already know this. Rouge lampshades that this thing was too powerful for even Shadow to defeat. Both Tails and Knuckles say that they ought to think this through and come up with a plan. And Amy says that'll be a first, and they might as well give up now. At least that last line made me smile in amusement, but it's still really bitchy of her. You'd think if Knuckles' friends were truly his friends, they'd always call people out on insulting Knuckles and tell them to be nice. Cosmo says that she wants to risk her life to battle the Metrics without risking theirs. And Sonic stays cheerful even at this point, in stark contrast to Cosmo, who is the only one being totally realistic and relatable when she reacts to the Metrics. Everyone else is taking them seriously, but not nearly as much as her, probably because their experienced heroes were used to it. Even though they're used to Eggman, who's not nearly as threatening as the Metrics. You'd think they'd be terrified. Tails puts up the shields against the Metrix lasers, and Chris says to expand the shield, and some heat-seeking missiles are fired. And the bad guy wants to unleash his entire arsenal against them, which does nothing. I'm not invested in any of these Metrics as characters, because I never know their names, and they have no personalities, other than they're evil for no reason. So why even give them lines? They're not characters. Then it turns out the Metrix airship is too jammed to blast thanks to all the debris. That's creative. And Sonic reveals that the spaceship's trying to crash into the blue typhoon. Why do they call it blue when it's white? Chris puts all power to the engines so it can get away in time. And there's a lot of tension about whether they'll crash into each other. But suddenly, out of nowhere, Shadow shows up and spin dashes all around the metric ship to attack them. Amy stupidly asks why Shadow wasn't destroyed, and Eggman explains that the metrics missed him after lampshading that he's like a bad rash and they can't get rid of him. I mean Eggman, not Shadow. A robot says that Eggman used a smoke screen to fake an explosion against his ship while he warped his spaceship away. Sonic says they have to destroy the engine room, and Shadow's an asshole about Sonic wanting to help him, even though he was never that way to any of his teammates and heroes in SA2. Every time he's like this, it's totally out of character. He was like this in Boom too, it was just so exaggerated that people finally noticed it. They go attack the airship and defeat it, and the Metrix refuses to surrender, even though Amy was nice enough to say she'll put out his fires if he surrenders now. So for once she was nice and merciful, reminding me that she's supposed to be a hero, since she's caring about someone who doesn't deserve it. Eggman says the spaceship's gonna self-destruct on them, and Shadow says he needs to buy some time, so he uses Chaos Control to stop time from advancing around the ship for 90 seconds. They have to use the Sonic Power Cannon, and they can use a warp field to weaken the Metrics. So the heroes have already won, basically, and are just gonna take forever to get to that point. Padding isn't epic. Realistically, when you're watching this for fun, you're always gonna skip forward a bunch to get past all this padding, and that's horrible for keeping the audience invested in the story. They pad out even more time by lingering shots on the characters with boring music, as all of them have blank expressions. And I wonder why Cosmo's the main character now, since she's the only one who constantly thinks about how she needs to defeat the Metrics. No one else is nearly as determined to beat them or worried about him. Why is she the main character when she barely does anything? Basically, this episode was about Eggman's spaceship being threatened by a Metrix one, until he has to fake his death warping away from it. And then he predictably ends up being just fine, and Sonic and Shadow have to work together to defeat the Metric spaceship, which at least takes a decent amount of time to get destroyed. I'd rather most of an episode be focused on action and plot progression, like as usual in Season 3, so it's a shame the whole show didn't have pacing this good. Too bad the beginning was horribly boring recap. It's not a comic book. In the end, Shadow uses Chaos Control to freeze time around the spaceship, so they can take forever to shoot Sonic towards it in the cannon and beat it when measly hit. It'd make more sense if you use Chaos Control to tear the spaceship apart, or warp it into a star. That'd be way better because it wouldn't take 90 seconds of Sonic going all the way to the cannon, and the cannon charging up. But that'd also be anticlimactic. Logically, there's no reason Shadow should win instantly in every fight with his teleportation and time-freezing powers, and that's a big problem with him surviving. He has story breaker powers, so he's a walking plot hole wherever he shows up. The instant Shadow showed up, he would have already beaten the spaceship, and felt like way more of a random Deus Ex Machina than he already did if it was realistic. This is why Fleetway is better, because Shadow 2 didn't even have Chaos Control power, so he wasn't overpowered. He also smiled more, so he felt less boring. Shadow wouldn't have felt like a Deus Ex Machina here if we were shown right away that Eggman survived the explosion and how. That he used a smoke bomb and warped his chip away. With Chaos Control, hopefully. Instead, they made it a surprise when it really wasn't a surprise that he survived when he's the main villain of the series. This is a very engaging arc. It's just that it's hard to take it seriously as remotely well written when I constantly see stuff that would invalidate it happening at all. Like the heroes breathing in space, and Shadow's mere existence. Especially since, you know, he was made on Earth, and yet he's a hedgehog. How did they get Mobian hedgehog DNA for him? Obviously, Gerald Robotnik warped to Mobius. Logically, Eggman should send Shadow to work for the heroes as a double agent, and when they get all the Chaos Emeralds, Shadow would be instructed to warp back to him with all of them. Hey, it's worth a shot! But since the heroes could just get Shadow to realize they're the good guys, and he shouldn't betray them, it'd be way more logical to just have Shadow warp all the heroes to prison cells, and keep Sonic frozen in time forever, since Shadow has Chaos Control. And Lara Sue froze Shadow forever with Chaos Control. Worst case scenario, Shadow could warp all the heroes to the sun. And even as a hero, He'd just warp Eggman to prison. Or the sun. That's how brutally overpowered most versions of Shadow are. Eggman should have already won with Shadow at his disposal. That's how ill thought out Shadow was with his powers. That's another reason the whole plot of SE2 wouldn't have logically happened, besides Gerald carrying out his evil plan after he was supposed to have been executed. Did his ghost set it all up? When you think about it, Shadow's got the Chaos Knuckles problem, because like him, he could have beaten his enemies in seconds effortlessly because he can use Chaos Control. Scourge can use it too, by the way. So it's really merciful of him to not use that against his enemies to kill them, even when he got an Anarchy Barrel. Good thing he listened to his conscience instead of teleporting all his enemies to the sun. Or prison to torture them. What, did he forget that he could teleport with magical jewels?